Everybody loses money at some point. It's easy to do, be it through a hole in your pocket or a luckless night at the casino. But losing $1 billion or more is actually very difficult. With the complex assets and shares that usually surrounds a billionaire's fortune, losing it all requires some colossal slip-ups. But the people I'll be discussing today could write the book on billion-dollar blunders, so pay close attention. If you ever make it big, learning from these guys might just save you from total ruin. Number 10. Patricia Kluger. There are worse ways to end a marriage than walking away with $1 billion. But that's what belly dancer turned socialite businesswoman Patricia Kluger did. Following her separation from television mogul John Kluger in 1990, Patricia received settlements of around $1 million every year, plus a $100 million home, eventually making her a billionaire. Already established in the upper echelons of American high society, Kluger felt compelled to continue the lavish lifestyle afforded by her marriage. This involved scandalously decadent hunting parties, which were facilitated with the help of her many in-house servants. Her own business ventures into the wine world were successful, but the 2008 recession, coupled with her lavish lifestyle, cost her dearly. Kluger's aggressive expansion of her wine company, Kluger Estate Winery, and the establishment of the super luxurious vineyard estates only exacerbated her financial problems. With the housing crisis, even the rich weren't much interested in buying her multi-million-dollar homes, even if they did come with private vineyards. The venture hemorrhaged money for Kluger, eventually forcing her to file for bankruptcy in 2011. Times are still tough for Kluger, but I hear the belly dancing business is booming, and it's never too late to get those hips moving again. Number 9. Phillip Bennett. While it's tricky to lose billionaire status once you have it, it's easier if you commit fraud on the regular. When Phillip Bennett, CEO of New York-based brokerage firm Refco, noticed hundreds of millions in losses from unpaid loans, he had the perfect solution. By disguising the losses as receivables owed to Refco by another company Bennett secretly owned, they'd effectively disappear, and the world would be none the wiser. The arrangement allowed Bennett indulgences like his 7 Ferraris, a $20 million plane, and a few Andy Warhol paintings. At the height of his fraudster activities in the early 2000s, Bennett had procured a tidy $1.5 billion from unwitting investors, helping him amass a personal fortune of just over $1 billion. But unfortunately, authorities discovered the debt, and Bennett was forced to pay for his lifestyle the hard way. By paying back what he owed, causing his firm to go bankrupt, and thinking long and hard about his actions over a 16-year prison sentence. Number 8. Bjrkgolfing Goodmansen. The second Icelandic billionaire in history, Bjrkgolfing Goodmansen was beaten to the title by his son Thor. No hammers here though, just insane wealth. Bjrkgolfer's dishonest dabbling in the shipping industry in the 80s, where he misrepresented earnings and bankrupted his company, culminated in the near collapse of the state-owned Fisheries Bank of Iceland. His resulting 12-month suspended sentence didn't turn him off business though. In the early 2000s, he amassed $1 billion fortune in the brewing and pharmaceutical industries, furthering his wealth by purchasing substantial shares in Iceland's second-largest bank, Landsbanken. He also enjoyed ownership of English soccer club West Ham United. But in 2008, the global banking crisis hit Iceland hard. Unluckily for Goodmansen, the Icelandic government refused to bail out privatized banks, leaving bank shareholders to bear the brunt of enormous debts. Within the space of a year, Goodmansen's net worth dropped from $1.1 billion to zero. The following year, he was declared bankrupt with remaining debts of over $700 million. As if his life wasn't already enough of a mess, in 2015 he was given a 4-year sentence for misleading Landsbanken customers leading up to the 2008 financial crisis. Number 7. Allan Stanford. For some billionaires, there's no point having all that money and not spending it. This was the viewpoint of Texan Allan Stanford, who began his journey to extreme wealth in real estate during the 1980s. With his growing fortune, he launched Stanford International Bank in 1985, basing the company in Antigua. In the following year, Stanford constructed a global finance empire and was even knighted by the Antiguan government in 2006. But while an economic hero in the eyes of some, Rumors began to spread. Word had it that Stanford's lavish displays of wealth, like his $100 million fleet of private jets, $20 million cricket tournament cash prizes, and $10 million mansion, were tied in with bribery, money laundering, and political manipulation. Not to mention the reports that he treated his bank as a personal ATM. Eventually, in 2009, Stanford was arrested after an investigation found Stanford Financial Group to be little more than a Ponzi scheme. It had promised investors safe, lucrative investments, but in reality had been funneling cash into its owners' pockets, all while falsifying records to hide the evidence. While Stanford was ordered to repay nearly $7 billion, it had long since been spent. His personal fortune at the time totaled $2 billion, leaving some of his 18,000 investors millions of dollars worse off. For them, the 69-year-old's 110-year sentence might be some consolation, but it doesn't pay for a new yacht. Number 6. Sean Quinn. Irishman Sean Quinn's career grew outwards from a small gravel business, with other ventures spanning the construction, insurance, and hospitality industries, among others. At his prime, the Sean Quinn of 2008 enjoyed a net worth of approximately $6 billion, making him the richest man in Ireland. Besides his fancy house in the Irish countryside, he was much less flashy with his wealth than the likes of Allan Stanford. Still, much of Quinn's cash was tied up in Anglo-Irish Bank, in which he held a 30% stake. But following some overly risky gambles, alongside the 2008 financial crash, Quinn's fortune was sapped. Quinn had been taking out enormous loans from the bank to bet on changes in its own share prices. But when the 2008 crisis sent shares plummeting at alarming rates, Anglo-Irish Bank was nationalized and called for Quinn to pay his debts. This $3 billion debt, together with huge losses in Quinn's insurance company and the general decline of the market, left Quinn bankrupt in 2011. With more than $3 billion still owed. Luckily, in 2015, around $3 billion of Quinn's debts were written off, leaving him to pay only around $20,000. Reports suggest he's now working as a consultant, but any regular job must seem a little underwhelming, having once been the richest man in Ireland. Number 5. Elizabeth Holmes. With a life of billionaire ambitions and the smarts to manifest them, Elizabeth Holmes seemed destined for greatness. She dropped out of Stanford University at 19 to pursue a company she'd started during her time there. The company, eventually named Theranos, offered revolutionary services and technology for diagnosing and monitoring diseases and administering drugs, and soon became one of Silicon Valley's most promising startups. By 2014, $400 million of investments had flooded in, valuing Theranos at $9 billion and Holmes a net worth of $4.5 billion. Holmes operated a policy of extreme secrecy regarding Theranos' operations, which investors were satisfied with, until in 2015, when the FDA launched an investigation into the company's methods. Holmes' chief scientist had warned her about inaccuracies in their tests and problems with their technology, but she continued business regardless. The FDA discovered these inaccuracies, as well as the fact that Theranos had been using standard industry blood analysis equipment in place of their own failing tech, and investigations were made public. Holmes shut Theranos down for good in 2018, forced to return money to investors after being charged with massive fraud, and the fortunes of both her company and herself dwindled to nothing. Her trial is set for 2020, and the future looks anything but bright for Holmes. Number 4. Adolf Merkel. The story of Adolf Merkel is one of tragedy, bad timing, and even worse luck. Through the late 20th century, Merkel developed his father's chemical business into the largest pharmaceutical retailer in Germany. This, alongside other ventures in pharmacy, finance, and construction, landed him a net worth of $12.8 billion by 2007. Never one for excess, Merkel rode a 15-year-old bicycle, shopped at Aldi, and flew economy. But his frugal living couldn't save him from the economic crash of 2008. Trouble came during an otherwise routine acquisition of a British cement company by VEM, Merkel's holding company. Merkel used his own cement company's shares as collateral to see the deal through. When share prices for Merkel's holding company dropped a whopping 75% in the banking crisis, banks began demanding accelerated loan repayments. Merkel was forced to make personal guarantees from his personal assets, costing him an initial $3.6 billion. A speculative bet in October that year that Volkswagen share prices would drop became another billion-dollar mistake for Merkel when VW stock skyrocketed, quadrupling in price. In January 2009, with the collapse of his family business seeming inevitable, he threw himself in front of a train near his home. He likely realized his pledge to personally front VEM's debts, which by then reached an extra $6 billion, would have been the end of his family's name in the business world. Number 3. Anton Schlecker. Sometimes the quickest to rise fall the hardest. No one exemplifies this better than Anton Schlecker. The German tycoon opened his first drugstore in 1975, and within 2 years had opened 100. By 2011, his 14,000-store continental empire was worth $10 billion. As for Schlecker, his personal wealth peaked at $4 billion in 2011, which he liked to splash on his expensive sports car collection. But insurmountable competition from rival chains, mixed with cases of fraud and illegally underpaying employees, led to the Schlecker empire's collapse. An expensive marketing push to restore the brand's reputation failed spectacularly, and Schlecker declared bankruptcy in 2012. All the while, Anton had been funneling millions into his family's personal accounts. A $14 million mistake he and his family would pay for both monetarily and with jail time. Falling from a total of $14 billion under his control to nothing, this man should have invested in a parachute. Number 2. Bernie Madoff. Beginning in penny stocks, Bernie Madoff grew himself into one of the most prominent, respected, and influential figures in the stock market throughout the 70s and 80s. By the late 80s, he was making around $100 million a year, allowing him to transfer his wealth into houses, yachts, sports cars, and various overseas accounts. Thanks to his magic touch, investors soon began pumping as much as $300 million a pop into his well-respected firm. The substantial returns Madoff presented to his investors kept them happy, but were, in fact, entirely fabricated. His system revolved around using money from new investors to pay returns to any existing clients who sought to cash out, which meant walking a tightrope act since as far back as the 80s. But it was only when investors attempted to redeem $7 billion at once that Bernie got rumbled. In reality, there was only around $300 million available. In December 2008, reportedly upon discovering the nature of Bernie's Ponzi scheme, his sons reported him to the federal authorities. While $65 billion was the often stated total defrauded from investors, around 2/3 of this was actually the fictional returns Bernie had convinced his investors existed. In reality, the total principal funds were more like $20 billion. Regardless, Bernie was given a 150-year sentence, his personal assets were forfeited, or at least as many could be located, which was tricky with such a gifted conman, amounting to just under $1 billion. The punishment was extended to his family, who were forced to forfeit their own assets for their involvement. Bernie, if you wanted to bond over finance with your family, you could have just played Monopoly. Number 1. Aiki Batista. Brazilian entrepreneur Aiki Batista began his career as a door-to-door insurance salesman, but soon moved into the precious metals and oil trades. Taking the gold and diamond mining markets by storm through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, Batista was sitting on $36 billion by 2012. He became well known for his playboy lifestyle of Lamborghinis, yachts, and private jets. But despite Batista's ambitions to become the richest man on earth, a sharp downturn in the precious metals industry and the Brazilian economy between 2012 and 2014 spelled trouble. On top of all of this, his oil company collapsed into bankruptcy once it was discovered to be greatly exaggerating production claims. Promising to pay back all of his resulting debts left Batista with personal losses of $35 billion in a single year, a number which approached $37 billion in the following years. A bank balance of negative $1 billion was all Aiki was left with. To make matters worse, in 2018, Batista was found guilty of paying more than $16 million in political bribes for public contracts during his peak years in Brazil. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. I guess you could say Aiki Batista bombed. So, how do you feel about these billionaires? Do you have any sympathy for them? And how would you avoid losing it all as a billionaire? Let me know in the comments section below. Thanks for watching.